We're always so delighted to have Jen with us. We claim her as our own, even though she thinks she lives in California. And I do like to point out when there are celebrities in the audience. And so I want to introduce a friend of mine. Now, here's a moment of, like, now do I tell him the truth about how old I am? Or, so I have to somehow work this. But many moons ago, I was in school with a wonderful woman who was, a year ahead of me? And really? Oh, you seem so much further advanced. Okay, so you're behind me in graduation. And then I remember reading one day that she went off to be the minister in a weird place called Salt Lake. So will you please welcome with me Reverend Bonnie Apps, who's joining us today. And I also see our friend Reverend Jan Ewing, who's, when she's not ministering to the world around the world, she's here with us, so we're grateful to have you here. It's wonderful. So please stand and turn to someone and say, thank you for being a blessing in my life. It's a beautiful thing. Realizing that we probably overindulged over this last weekend, figure it's probably a good idea to have us rise and sit quite a bit, We'll work out those calories. Although, I have to tell you about my new exercise program. This is brilliant. Somebody was just telling me that every Monday they get their little iPad and they put it on their elliptical and they turn on to the spirituallyfree.org and they watch my sermon. So I figure that counts as exercise, right? Why not, Vicarious. Anyways, it's all good. I always feel like at this time of year, I have to do some explaining. I got some explaining to do here because many of us come out of a more traditional framework of religion, and so we may have a relationship with Jesus that has evolved. Certainly has for me. And so I always kind of like to explain some things so that if you're relatively new to the community, you know what's going on. You see, for me, I grew up as a Southern Baptist, nice little Southern Baptist church in Lakewood, Colorado, and I assumed that Jesus' last name was Christ. That's what they always called him, right? Marty Bach or Jesus Christ. It just made sense to me. And it wasn't until later that I began to understand there was a difference between the personage of Jesus and this presence that we refer to as the Christ. And so I want to spend a little time on this morning because it kind of sets up the conversation as we are speaking of this is our affirmation, which is actually taken from one in the Science of Mind text. My soul rejoices in the realization of the Christ. We're speaking a little differently of this divine presence. You see, when I grew up as a good Southern Baptist, the way you got into heaven was through Jesus. You accepted Jesus as your personal Savior, and you were baptized, and that increased the likelihood that you would make it to heaven, although there was other hoops, I got to say. There was many, many hoops, and I didn't do so well with a lot of those hoops, I must say. Right? Some of us grew up with that concept. And so when I remember being a young person questioning my own religious tradition. Not making it wrong, just questioning it. And not only questioning my religion, but those that I saw around me. Because even as a young person, I don't know where I got this crazy idea, but I always had it. And the crazy idea was, if there's only one God, then aren't we all talking about the same thing? Now, I later discovered that's not such a crazy idea, but it was certainly not a welcome idea in my Sunday school class, right? Because what I was taught was that there is a right way and a lot of wrong ways. Lucky for us, we had the right way, right? And some of you came out of traditions that believed it was the right way. Now, I don't say this to disparage anybody, but again, my little thinking was, wait a minute. Can't there be many ways? And I remember just questioning as a young person, saying, this to me doesn't make sense, that a loving presence would judge some and punish others, and it just didn't quite work for me. So I made a conscious decision, which my parents supported me in, which was to no longer go to church. Now, the reason that happened was because my parents divorced, and that was a big sin in our church. And so it was no longer really comfortable, so I was like, yes, sorry about the divorce, folks, but yes, can do something productive with Sunday mornings, right? And so I went off and pursued my path, and my path, it's interesting, I always felt a sense of the divine, I always felt a sense of the presence, but I didn't always understand the context in which I was hearing this. I loved reading the Bible, and I loved reading the stories of Jesus, and I loved reading the miracles, and I always felt a resonance and a sense of that divine presence, and yet some of what I heard didn't make sense to me. So I formed an opinion that I was one of those people, you may know of some of these people, who was spiritual, not religious. Right? You know some of those people? There's a whole bunch of them here. And then I went on to say that I didn't believe in organized religion. So when I went to my first Science of Mind church, I said that to somebody, and they said, oh, you'll love us. We're completely disorganized. Right? So some of you know where I'm coming from, right? And yet, on my own, of my own volition, I was able to create all kinds of chaos and havoc, doing it my way. And part of that stemmed from the fact that I did not feel good about me. Some of that I took from my upbringing was that there was something wrong with me, right? Well, it's not that hard to figure out if you're born a sinner, I mean, that's not a great start, I gotta say, Exactly, and it's all downhill from there, baby. It was like, Now, today, being the enlightened soul that you see in front of you, I have a different concept and perspective on these matters, but at the time, I felt there was something wrong with me, that I was not living up to this ideal. I just, that was there. And then through the series of events that unfolded through my life, I reinforced that idea. And yet, I always felt something. So I was a seeker even before I knew what I was seeking for. Like many, I looked in the ways of materiality, thinking that the better job, more money, better relationship, all those things would provide the source to fill the emptiness. And yet, oddly enough, it didn't work. So having really managed to create chaos and havoc in my life, I decided one morning that I must do life differently. And I'd been introduced to a concept which is called PMA, Positive Mental Attitude. And I'd become aware of a number of books such as Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, Dale Carnegie was very influential, all these great minds that were saying that the way you think determines your experience. It is not what happens to you, but what happens within you that actually determines your experience of life. And if you can learn to think differently, then you can have a different experience of life. So I said to myself, this probably won't work, but I'm going to give it a try. That's how positive I was at that point in time in my life, right? Probably won't work, but what the heck? What I'm doing is clearly not working. I've proven this. They say that Edison had tried 2,000 experiments of trying to make a filament light bulb before he found one that worked. And so people said to him, I can't imagine wasting that much time. And he said, what waste? I just found 2,000 ways that didn't work. Well, I found a number. I didn't get to 2,000, but I found a number of ways that didn't work to create the life I wanted. Now, in these positive mental attitude books, they would make reference to the G word from time to time. But, of course, I had some resistance, shall we say, to that. And so I didn't want to hear about God. I just wanted my life to work. But I was pursuing and finding, and I found myself in a Dale Carnegie course at one point, public speaking course, which was brilliant, and went on to assist with that, and it was just wonderful, and met a young lady who said, "Gee, Marty, you ought to go to this church that I go to." Thrilled to hear those words, trust me. Now again, at the time, Sundays were reserved for important things like brunch, sleeping in, the important things of life. But I remembered that I had made a commitment myself to do something differently, and I thought, what's it going to hurt, right? What's it going to hurt? One time, and if it gets her off my back, what the heck? High motivation, I want you to hear. And I walked into a center not unlike this one, although they did have this amazing pipe organ with 1,000 pieces of pipe, and they were playing on the pipe organ Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And I thought, I was a Baptist for many years, and I don't know all the songs they played, but I'm pretty sure that was not one of them. And so I realized that it's true, we are not in Kansas anymore, Toto, baby. This is a whole new world. And in that experience, the minister began to speak about impersonal principles that were at work in our universe, and ways of being, and ways of thinking, and ways of experiencing life differently. So similar to the works that I had been reading and the books that I had been understanding. And it wasn't about something outside of myself, but rather an inner change that I would need to make if I wanted to have a different experience of life. I liked the possibility. I liked the possibility that life could be different. But I was kind of like that guy. There was a guy, a businessman, and he owned a shop, kind of Main Street. And, like a good businessman, he looked around at the people on the Main Street with him and thinking, if these people would get their act together, our business would be better here on Main Street. And boy, the one that really got him, he looked right across the way, and there was this other shop, and the guy wouldn't wash his windows. You know how big plate glass windows are, and he's like, the guy won't wash his windows. And so he did what all of us do when things aren't right in our life. We complain, and we whine, and we moan, and we talk to people that have nothing to do with it, and tell them how unsatisfied we are with the experience of life. But boy, it's starting to get to him. And so finally one day, one of his loving customers said to him, sir, I'm going to make a suggestion. Why don't you set the example? Maybe if your guy across the street would see you out there washing your windows and how sparkly they look and how wonderful, he might be inspired to wash his own, and then you would get the experience that you wanted. So it's worth a shot. So later that afternoon, before they closed, he got all his hardware together and he washed those windows, and boy, they were sparkly and wonderful, and he went home for the night. And the next day, lo and behold, he went into his shop and he opened the door and he's looked out the window, and it was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Somewhere in the night, my shop owner across the street has come and washed his windows. I can see clearly now how clear his are. Right? Right? I don't know if you're like that. Jesus said it a little differently, but it's a little confusing about a speck in your eye and a log in another, or some weird thing, and it's kind of an odd imagery. So we'll just go with the window washing. But the idea that I began to understand and have continued to understand is that I don't see the world the way it is. I see the world the way I am. that it is my filter which perceives the world. Now, Jesus did say something to us very powerful that we can all understand. And he said this, "Seek, and you will find. Ask, and it shall be given. Knock, and the door will be opened." And so, it is true. These are spiritual principles, which for me was the essence of what Jesus was trying to teach us. He was trying to teach us that there is a greater possibility at work in our lives, that we tend to see the limited self, and we see through the filter of limitation, and we experience life as limited. But Jesus and the great masters through the ages have said there's an unlimited being that is expressing through you. And so when he taught us these spiritual principles, so simply, so beautifully, he said, "Seek, and you will find." Now, this principle, as all principles, works no matter what. And it turns out that whatever you seek, you shall find. So when I came into the teaching with this hole in my heart, with this sense of unworthiness, then I was seeking that which would confirm my reality. So I had any number of failed relationships. I had any number of situations, of living situations and work situations that didn't support me in my well-being. Why? Because that's what I was seeking. I don't think this is going to work, but I'll give it a try. Well, it didn't work. I hear people say that to me sometimes, well-meaning people, but Bonnie, I'm sure you've never heard this, but I tried that for a while, and it didn't work. Really. So if we seek, we find. The question then is, what are we going to start seeking? All of us, I believe, are seekers. All of us are in that place of awareness that knows that there's something more to us. There is a desire within the heart. There is a longing to know that which is ineffable. And yet we live in our realities, and sometimes we get consumed by our realities, or we get consumed by the thinking of the people that are around us. Have you noticed this? You notice how this happens? You start, that's why I love coming here. We're all happy and joyous, and we celebrate who we are, and it's fabulous, and you can say, "I love myself in this group," and everybody's like, "Yeah!" Right? But likewise, sometimes we get out into the world and we find ourselves resonating at the energy that is around us, and we start behaving like that energy. So, of course, I'm watching the news. I don't do a lot of hard and fast things, but here's what I believe to be true. I do not believe people should be allowed to shop on Thanksgiving. I just think it's morally, fundamentally wrong. So sorry if any of you went shopping on Sunday. We'll take, confession and all that later. I just think it's like, really, we can't have one day just to hang out and love each other and stuff. But then the real event comes, Black Friday, where we move into the Christmas spirit. The joy of the Christ presence that has come forth, and we grab our gun and our taser gun and we head to the mall and beat the heck out of each other so that we can get that best deal so we can share the love. Right? I mean, it's insane. It's like, don't think that was the entire message of Jesus, really. I'm just saying, right? It's so crazy. So, but sometimes we get caught up in a mob mentality. We get caught up in the ways of the world. So it's so vital for us that we balance our energy. You see, the great masters have taught us through the ages that the way we come in contact with the divine is in quiet, in solitude, in prayer, in meditation. And it becomes actually very important for us to have a regular spiritual practice if we are going to be grounded in the awareness of the greater something. right? And so even when you see Jesus in his ministry moving through the world, having a tremendous impact, healing here and, 5,000 there, and he was a rock star in his age, right? People were coming from all over and wanting to touch his garments and wanting to hear his message and wanted to be there with him. And you've got to imagine that gets old, right? I mean, how many people can you heal in a day, right? But you see, balanced with that is after those times of public ministry were always times of withdrawal, time of going into the wilderness, the 40 days, the time of quiet and solitude. I believe that the real purpose between this holiday season is actually to move into the holy and the sacred. I don't know. I read it somewhere, I'm sure. It was an ad somewhere I saw, Right? And so it becomes fundamental to our lives that we seek the presence and that we ask for the presence and that we knock on that door so that a greater possibility is opened for us. I've been reflecting much on the words recently of when Jesus said to us that in my Father's house, in the spiritual dimension, there are many mansions, is how it's translated. But I think more accurately, the translation should be in this universe, there are many dimensions. And I go to prepare a place for you, so that where I am, you might be also. You see, one level of understanding of that is at a physical way of being, but there's another larger way of understanding that is an understanding of consciousness. And so the great masters through the ages are those who have come and said, there is a greater possibility. Buddha did the same thing. I've been rereading a wonderful book. April hates it when I do this. I like naming all these books that we don't have and everybody goes running out there. But anyways, you can find it if you want. And it's a wonderful book called The Good Heart. And what it is a series of conversations with the Dalai Lama. There's a group of Christian meditators, they call it Christian meditation, who formed a number of years ago, and there's a whole movement of kind of moving back into that meditation from the monastic way of meditation. And through some interesting coincidences, the Dalai Lama met one of the monks and was invited for a brief time, and then many years later they invited him back and asked him if he would come and be with this group to meditate together and to share his thoughts. Now, the Dalai Lama is absolutely brilliant. Just very intellectually astute. If you want to talk Buddhism and the ins and outs of Buddhism, he can take you there. He's also just such a light and a loving and fun, joyous presence. And so he said, yes, I'll come, but you need to know I don't really know much. What they were asking was him to read Scripture, Christian Scripture, and then share his insight, share his awareness. And so as he'd read these, it was almost as if for the first time, and then he would share what came through to him and sort of how that relates to Buddhism and the commonality. And so what I loved about the Dalai Lama, one, humility, that he was not going to be an expert where he was not an expert, but he was willing to share that. And number two, what he said very clearly, time and time again, you'll read through this book, is he said, I'm not here to change anyone, to convert anyone. If you're going to be a Christian, be a Christian. And if you're going to be a Buddhist, be a Buddhist. Follow your path. I would say if you're going to be a metaphysician, be a metaphysician. If this is your path, then follow that. Do the things that we invite you to do so that you might deepen this path. And of course, if this is not your path, then let us help you find that path, right? Because what is essential is that we each find that presence of the divine within us. So in his sharing, he shared in many of the ways how the Buddha and Jesus were so much. Now, just want to point out, just as long as we're clarifying things, the Buddha's name was not Buddha. Okay? That was a title he was given. So just as the Christ was not Jesus' last name, neither is the Buddha. but it is the nature of who they were. And so one who moves into the realization of this Christ presence is Christic in nature. One who moves into the Buddhist awareness is Buddhic in nature. And for me, it's less important because the philosophies are very different and very much the same. As is true with all of our religious paths, at the heart, I believe, there's a commonality that speaks to the wonder and the beauty of the divine. And that the divine at the heart of all of this is not something that is separate from us, but rather lives and resides within us. And so the awakening that comes forth is when we can open to that greater life experience, as we are willing to wash our own windows. And some of the windows that we need to wash have to do with our own sense of limitation, our own sense of belief of our unworthiness, our own beliefs about all that stuff that we made up. That somehow it was better to be poor, right? We may not be rich, but at least we're honest. Because obviously those two are incompatible. I mean, what is that all about? Have you ever heard anybody say that? Yes, I've heard people say that, right? I think it's better to be rich and honest, personally, So it's that window washing, and then amazingly we begin to see the world with new possibility. So it is true that if we seek, we will find. And the truth is, no matter what we seek, that is what we find. If you seek the reasons why you're not enough, you will find them. But likewise, when we can have that shift in awareness, and we begin to seek that divine presence that knows only love, knows only joy, knows only beauty, then we begin to experience that inwardly. And when we experience the inwardly, it is by its very nature necessary that outer experience begins to conform to that inner awareness. And then we ask. You see, there is something very powerful about asking. Not asking God out there to give us something that we want. That's Santa Claus. That's a different part of this program coming up. But asking for the awareness, asking for the insight, asking for the clarity. And when that is asked, it is given, it is revealed. And then knocking. I stand at the doorway and knock. You see, there is that dimension of spirit all around us. And it is as if we stand on this side of reality, and all we can see is what's in this little room. We thought, well, that's it. It's all that's available. But as we begin to knock on that door and it is opened, we see that greater dimension, that greater possibility, that greater essence that is all around us. And we begin to understand that love is the only reality, that peace is the natural way of being, that joy is a quality of spirit that is seeking its revelation, that abundance is surrounding us. And when we can see from that higher dimension, the door is opened and the portal of our soul is experienced and expressed. Pretty simple formula. Seek, ask, knock. But realize, my friends, that that is an inner process. The great masters, whether it be Jesus or Buddha or the many others who've come through the ages, have helped us to understand that there is a greater possibility for us. But we must wash our own windows. Know that wherever you are on this journey, that you are loved and fully supported in being your highest essence. I know some of you are like, God, how long do you have to knock on this door? Would it kill you to put in a doorbell? I mean, we're just like, I get it. But when that doorway is opened, even if it's just for a crack, we begin to understand and see this greater dimension, and our life and our reality is open. So wherever you are, just know that you are loved, that you are supported, and allow this to be a place that celebrates who you are. Let us pray. As we take this moment to turn inward, to breathe deeply into the presence and the power of the one life, always around us, always within us. And we stand witness to this divine presence that is forever and ever seeking its highest self-expression through its creation. We are reminded in this moment that this life is not something separate from our life, but rather our life is lived within the one life. And therefore those qualities of spirit, of peace, of love, of joy, of harmony, of abundance, are ours right now. And so we open our hearts to receive divine love. And we open our minds to experience divine wisdom. We knock at the doorway of our soul and allow this healing presence to enter in. And we stand witness to this presence and this power in ourselves and in each other. Whether we call that the Christ or the Buddha or any of the 10,000 names, it's less important. As are we willing to see the light? Are we willing to be the light? Are we willing to allow our light to shine so brightly that we become a healing presence in the world? How grateful and joyful I am to know in this moment that even as I speak this word, we are calling forth the presence of wholeness. And we know that that wholeness reveals itself as health, as well-being, as vitality. We call forth the presence of divine love, knowing that it heals and nurtures and blesses and transforms all. And that we are lifted up into this greater awareness. We realize in this moment that we are abundant beings right here, right now, for we participate in the divine flow of life, joyously giving, graciously receiving, participating fully in the flow of the divine. I invite you now that if there is a burden on your heart this day, that into this sacred space, into this conscious realization of the divine, we simply be willing to surrender that, to release it, and to allow the greater possibility to emerge, to be healed and be transformed through the renewal of our mind. How good it is to know this truth. How blessed we are to bear witness to the healing, transformative power of love. And so we are blessed. We give thanks for the many blessings. And we extend that blessing outward. We bless this spiritual community, knowing that we are divinely guided, that we are abundantly supplied in bringing forth our highest vision, our fullest ministry. We extend this blessing to our brothers and sisters around the planet this day. We're holding that high vision for a planet at peace, for a world that works for everyone. And as always, we bless all priests, all rabbis, all ministers, all teachers of every faith. For we recognize and know there are many pathways to the divine. We honor and bless them all. We celebrate the realization of the divine. And so it is with a profound sense of joy and gratitude then that I simply give thanks. I give thanks for this inner realization. I give thanks for its perfect demonstration. I give thanks for a law of mind operating upon the consciousness established here, bringing forth the highest good for all concerned. And so in joy and gratitude, I simply release this word, knowing that it is so. As together we say, and so it is.